Hello, everyone. This is very good. Clinics and churches. I'm going to introduce our panel in a moment, but I just wanted to take a couple of seconds to really echo some of the points that have just been raised by the other members of the directors, the executive, which is that when Robin Carhart Harris was last on this stage at the last thing that we did at this venue, he gave, you've all seen that amazing diagram, haven't you? This is your brain on placebo, this is your brain on psilocybin. And he gave a really lovely analogy. He said, you know, your brain on placebo is like a bit where it's the beginning of the party. And all the people who deal with particular stuff in the perhaps university department, they're all hanging out with each other because they know each other. They're familiar with each other. And then you take the psilocybin, and what suddenly happens is that people start reaching out to other people that they don't know so well, and the conversation, the new experience unfolds. So we're very much hoping that that's going to happen here. Breaking Convention is a charity organisation, and the last-minute nature and the unfolding delight of the experience is because nobody here really gets paid anything. All the lovely speakers, some of them get their expenses, but basically they're here giving up their time so that we as a community can build the psychedelic vision of the future that we would like to be in. So that's the deal. So I'm very, very pleased to have these amazing people here. Natasja Pelgrom. So I'm going to let Natasja introduce herself properly in a moment. We have David Erritzøe. Very good, very good. He's our clinician. We're going to get him. No, we're not. He's lovely. He's lovely. We have this guy here, Danny Nemu. Am I pronouncing that right? Is it Nemu?
I chose a difficult name to pronounce.
You should, yeah.
Nice. Nemu.
Yeah, nice one. Anyway, so we're going to take the first section just for our lovely panel here to speak about like where they're coming into this space. So I think we'll probably be exploring the relationship between the clinics and the churches. And that's just kind of the placeholders for this idea of psychedelic spirituality that's focused around that, and then psychedelic kind of research and scientific inquiry, and the therapeutic side of that that's increasingly emerging into our culture. And David's got some videos to show us. Is it of stuff like that going on? Is it of people being all clinicized? Is that what we're...
You'll see.
We'll see.
It's not uploading, but...
So, first few minutes then, just to get some sense of where people are coming into this space. Natasja, would you like to start?
I would love to give it to him with the candle.
What are we doing with the...
What am I doing with the candle?
What are you doing with the candle?
What do you do with candles? I'm lighting it.
You're lighting it. Look, just take over while distract everyone from whatever dangerous thing he's trying to do on stage.
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation here, and especially to the team. Thank you. And it's really lovely to actually see faces and not screens. So thank you very much. I hope you hear me well. Is this okay?
Sorry?
I'm getting people saying no.
Just
So,
a little bit away. Yeah.
a little bit away like this. Is this better? I'm saying people no, yes, no. It says off here. On here. This better? No. That's definitely not better. Hello? Yeah. That's better? Yeah? Okay, good. So, it sounds to me like this is the same. Can't hear me. Maybe a different mic. Yes, this is better. I'm going to try to speak really loud so everybody can hear me. I love this topic because I love to come in and see ways to bridge worlds. One of the things that I'm extremely passionate about is to understand different points of views, and especially what Julian just shared about nice little hubs. And if we stay in this nice little hub, where is growth? If we're not challenged with each other's viewpoints, how can we ever change? But before I go into too much of that, because I think we're going to explore this together, is the understanding of the type of work. So I've been working in the space of facilitation for almost a decade now and serving different medicines. And one of the understanding and the touching points that are really in tension is the approach of, let's say, the yin energy and the yang energy. And I think we can all agree that we are very much wired by a yang energy. So that would be a doing energy. And one of the things about facilitation and holding this space is a non-doing. It's intuitive, it's fluid, it's creative. And the tension that I'm observing is that we're trying to approach a lot of this work with only this yang. As many people as possible serve this. How can we get as far as possible? One of the things that is rising more and more is the facilitation. We need more facilitators in this work. And because of that, there is this tendency to go very fast, which again is a very yang energy. So from a more meta point of view into this space, I believe the invitation is for us to approach it yin, which is dreaming, which is being, which is fluid. And as we do that, we go in and slow down. And if we are not approaching it in this way, we're going way too fast. And we are not in a space of maybe seeing collaboration and connection and empathy. So this is one of the things that I'm very passionate about, of discovering these touch points. And how can we invite both in? How can we invite in balance of both? So this is one of the perspectives. And then, of course, to go back into spirituality, research, and personal, for me, they're all equally important because we do need all of these facets. The amount of people that come to receive are coming because of research, are coming because of so many people dedicating their time and education. But there is another part, and that has to do with the spiritual aspect. To me personally, it's interwoven and connected. Whatever belief system, once the mycelium starts to work, you start to see, sense, feel in parts of you the interconnectedness of all. And you might label it as the great mystery, God, the divine, nature, life. That's each to their own. So my viewpoint and what I would love to bring in is the collaboration of all, and that all are important, and we're here to bridge spaces. I will leave it at that for now, and I'd love to pass it on.
Who would you like to choose?
I would love to choose Danny. Dan. Dan. That's Dan.
Perfect.
Good morning, everybody. Am I holding it right? Am I doing it right? Yeah?
Like the voice of God.
I'm going to light this candle, and we arrived at the table here at the altar, and I noticed that the clinic is already represented with this packet of Nurofen. So I'm going to light a candle to make things, balanced. We're going to be bridging worlds. Thank you. I was in Brazil in about 2007, and I asked a kind of middle-aged woman at a feitio. Feitio is where you make ayahuasca, where you make daime. I asked her about a particular spirit, and she kind of looked at me and she said, "How long have you been drinking daime?" And I went, 7 years, which is quite a long time back in 2007. And she said, "You're just a beginner." And she didn't answer my question. I won't tell you the name of the spirit because I'm superstitious about these things. Names have power. So I guess I'm the reverend here, so I'm going to bring a reactionary and reverential perspective to the topic. And I want to, I guess, I don't want to make a straw man, but I want to point to some of the concerns that I have with the clinical use of psychedelics. Right, my own background, is probably obvious, is from Santo Daime. I've got a big respect for the indigenous world, and I'm not seeing the same in the clinic at all. In the research that I've come across, and I used to be the librarian of an ayahuasca kind of research library, none of the traditional taboos that I'm aware of are asked in all of the psychological literature, biomedical literature. I'll give you an example. Dieta, sexual dieta. There isn't an indigenous group in the entire Amazon that I'm aware of that doesn't have a sexual dieta before and after using ayahuasca. That might be 3 days in the case of Santo Daime, or it might be months in the case of traditional shamanism. I haven't found a single psychological study, which has even asked the question of whether the person's in dieta when they take psychedelics. So that raises some questions, really. If we're going to look at something and try and work out best practices, but not incorporate anything of traditional knowledge on the matter, I think that's a big problem. Another one would be the menstrual cycle. People don't ask about the menstrual cycle when they're being studied. What I mean to say is when you have these psychological studies, the various questionnaire questions include various things, but not that. Why is that so important in the indigenous world and not important at all in, it seems, clinical practice? I do know of one psychiatrist who is about to ask that question. He's my favourite psychiatrist, and it's because he's absolutely steeped in ayahuasca. He's really, really put his work in with the tradition. So, lack of research, I guess, all tribes have taboos, and so, for example, the sexual dieta is a taboo in indigenous tribes. We have a taboo in the clinical world. It's SSRIs. If you've been taking antidepressants, you can't have ayahuasca. In much the same way that if you've eaten pork, for example, you can't have ayahuasca in certain indigenous tribes. So this was come up with by Calloway and Grob. I believe it was about 20 years ago that there was this theoretical contraindication between SSRIs and ayahuasca, meaning you might get serotonin syndrome. You might have something terrible happen to your brain if you take these two things together. There hasn't been any research into that at all since that day. This was one guy or two guys came up with this theoretical contraindication, no research to it, no data for it. The UDV, who's one of the ayahuasca religions, has ignored that for the last 20 years. No one's died. And it's an interesting question, isn't it? Why do we have this taboo in this world? And bearing in mind that the number of people on antidepressants is massive, and they've got much higher suicide rates. So this kind of taboo, and if you think ayahuasca can have impacts on depression, then why are we excluding this from those people on the back of a taboo which hasn't been investigated and has no data for it? So that's one thing I want to say. Another criticism I want to make is the lack of mastery which I'm seeing in the clinical world. Like I was speaking to a very well-intentioned friend of mine the other day who was going to trip sit for someone. I think she had trips sat for someone. She's a psychotherapist and working very hard in the area. And she hadn't taken the drug that the person she was sitting for was going to take. I remember this being a bit of a hoo-ha in the press. Should someone who hasn't taken a drug administer it to someone else? The fact that this question is even being asked means that something is way off. It's like if you rocked up at your dentist and the guy said, I've never used a drill before, you'd be like, well, maybe I'll go to the wise woman down the road who's going to pull my tooth out with some pliers. This is a big no-no for me. As Hieronymus says, you don't tell a sailor by how they handle the shallow waters, it's by how they handle a storm. In the indigenous world, one makes alliances with spirits, right? Knowing what a dosage is not knowledge of a particular psychoactive. What?
Just pass it on.
Pass it on?
Pass it on.
Pass the mic on.
You've set out the stall.
Oh, okay.
You've set out the stall.
All right. So that's what I want to say. Thank you.
He's like all, he's like all radical and like,
Ooh, excited. Now, the voice of reason.
Yes, sure. Thank you. Yeah, now I'm really nervous that Celia is not here as well to help me out.
Sorry, we're with you. We're with
Yeah,
you.
yeah. And I guess I'm not the favorite psychiatrist you're referring to, but I'm a psychiatrist, so I'll, I guess, represent the clinical aspect, and I'm sure it will be a lively discussion. It sounds like it's going to be, so that's great. And maybe there will be some people stepping in from the audience as well. Actually, one in the audience right now is looking into aspects of sexuality on trial data and also implementing menstrual cycle kind of stuff from trials that we are conducting. So some of that is in the studies, not to be too defensive, but at least I felt I could say that because I know that's the case. I took it so literal, as like churches, clinics, or a cold alley say, what would you imagine that I should be talking about? And then he fortunately said the same thing as I thought, which is a bit different. It's very literate about the word clinic, because I work in the Imperial team, do research, also clinical psychiatrist, but mainly just doing this work these years. And we, as probably all of you know, with Robin and David Knott and Bruna, Ross, everybody who have been involved, Chris, Leo, everybody, we have been doing this work, and we have been doing that in an extremely opposite kind of setting to what you would do if you did it in this sort of more real world, maybe even shamanistic, ceremonial setting. So it's a deeply uninspiring clinical NHS setting that we then desperately try to almost disguise, and there's almost something a bit sneaky in trying to hide that this is a uninspiring, very clinical room. And that's what we have been doing for years. We have had to do that because these trials, that was the way we could have them approved and safely conducting them and having all these regulatory bodies saying okay to our plans. And what then happened a couple of years ago was that when I got the sort of lectureship role at Imperial, I have a foot in the NHS. So part of that employment is that there's also an element of my position that is in an NHS trust. So I then had the opportunity to discuss with the trust what could my role be. And I suggested to them whether the ECT suite, so electroconvulsive therapy clinic, that I had done a bit of training in years before, and it was a very nice little clinic. And I asked, how much do you actually use that space? And they did not use it that much. And I said, could we maybe do research there on days where you are not using the ECT, doing the ECT there? And we were allowed to do that. And then they ended up moving the ECT out. And now we have, in a way, moved fully in and tried to transform that space to a purposely created space for these kind of treatments, but in an NHS kind of context. And that suddenly meant that we had to make a lot of decisions and suddenly could control the space instead of just putting a colorful draping with some fractal pattern onto a bin or a oxygen outlet from the wall. We could actually, try to strip the whole thing down, not completely. There's still weird little alarms everywhere and stuff, but we are then sort of cleaned the whole thing up and try to rebuild it and create a space that hopefully should be, suited for and supporting the process that people are going through with these experiences, but still being acceptable and edible for a scalable thing in the NHS if these treatments are actually going to go through the whole process and being integrated into this medicinal sort of westernized model. Then clinics need to be there for them, the spaces. One thing is the therapies, that's a whole other story, but the spaces. And so we are trying to make this a bit, and maybe as a little bit of a model for how it might be possible to create such spaces and clinics in the NHS. And so I had a little video clip, but now I've been speaking for so long that maybe I can show it if anybody want to see. It's actually not from the space, but we are collaborating with an artist who is here, who has his studio up the road, Jack Joyner, who sits over here. And they're doing a documentary about the production of the the pieces, the art that will be in the clinic. And so there's a clip from that probably will go into that documentary, I'm not sure, where we speak together. Mainly I will show the part where Jack speaks about these pieces, because at least that's part of creating a setting. That's a sort of visual, experiential setting of the room that we are creating. Then there's the rest of it, the decor, what have we done, bringing in different furniture, lighting, but without maybe the very psychedelic suggestive elements to it, also because I don't think that would be deeply accepted in the NHS. So, and also I find it myself and colleagues I've spoken to sometimes maybe too suggestible, and why decor the space in a way through what other people on these drugs have actually visually experienced, and then created almost art based on that, and use create the decor from that. So we have stepped in a different direction that I'm sure will split, and some people might find it a bad idea, some people might not. We'll see. But so I wanted to maybe show a little video clip later from some of what Jack is working on, which we find quite exciting.
Do we want to see the film now? Yes. Okay.
Okay, actually this one is not yet, because I tried to transfer something. Yeah, speak, please.
Just as a quick aside, while we're talking about the spaces, I was part of a research trial in 2019 at King's College Hospital, and very, very generously, after we'd done the session where 6 people were dosed with psilocybin, in fact 2 people got the maximum dose, including me, of the 6 people in the cohort, they came to me afterwards very generously and said, could we have done anything better? And the only thing I could think of was the fact that we could have invited the people who were the subject of the research to help make the room by at least putting the carpet down on the ward floor so it was a little softer. That was the only thing I could think of. The rest of it, when I came back into the setting, I instinctively kind of bowed. It was like coming into like an ayahuasca session or something. That's the vibe that I had.
It's not coming up.
Is it working?
No. Does maybe someone want to reply to what David said, and then
I would.
Fight! No.
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 We'll share.
Share.
No,
share.
no, it just always works like this.
Well,
we can try,
thank
we can try the
you,
other
first
side.
of all, for what you've shared, and trying to make an attempt, because that counts a lot. And there is a lot lost in this as well, because it's already the language that we're using. We're using the word trip sitting. We're using the words drugs. So what is, it's a question for you. How do you feel about that? And then there is another part that is lost, is when you're trained to work with these substances from a traditional aspect. You are trained for decades to be a surgeon. And you are in a seat of healing with someone. And it takes dedication on working on self, one. And it takes mastery, so thank you for naming that word. And then it takes someone to teach you, an elder, a supervisor. And this is what I personally feel is getting lost in the midst, is the recognition of the fact that there is a difference between being a surgeon, a curandera, or a shaman, that works with the substance in the purpose of healing. And this is also a word that's almost taboo, because any website that claims to do healing, we cannot say that, so we'll say transformation. And then there is a part, because of the clinical setting, the personal use and some of the retreat use are copying that setting. The only difference very much is the understanding of one-on-one work and group work. Being able to support and navigate of an ecstatic state or an expanded state is, in a group setting, extremely different than in a one-on-one setting. So I believe parts of education need to be woven in and recognized with the differences of the beautiful setting that you can create. If you're not recognizing that others have been working and are trained for healing in this, then I think all the training programs out there are going to hit at some point a clash, because facilitators, guides, therapists are going to find at some point that there is a language of the unseen not being educated.
So how do we set a space to make it good for a psychedelic experience? I'm going to sound like an arsehole here. We ask Mike. If you were to ask me what you should do with a room which is being used for applying ECT to a series of people's brains over a number of years, I would obviously say incense, prayer, and défumation. I wonder if that was done in the Imperial. Actually, I know, because a friend of mine was on the Imperial. I've actually just remembered where we met. I was doing the psilocybin trial with a kind of tennis ball on my chin and in a kind of crash helmet thing. And you were the guy sitting to my side, weren't you? I remember, because at one point you said, "There's a clot," because my, what do you call that thing that goes into your vein? That thing had a clot in it before I got my dose, so that got taken out. So good to see you again. Yeah.
You're welcome.
But what I'm saying is that, I mean, I can see that the intention is there, and in fact, a friend of mine, Eduardo, was on that trial, or rather, he was one of the technicians there, I believe. He used to get up really early in the morning and go and smudge the place before anyone else was there. But he didn't want anyone to know that he was doing that, because that's not cool in the clinic, right? The fact that I think there's a massive, massive gap there. There's not a single ceremony that takes place. Well, there might be the odd ceremony, but without incense to clear the space, without some kind of banishing ritual before and afterwards, and what we're seeing here, an infinity well, where everyone can have whatever I don't know. I mean, the intention's lovely.
I guess one of the questions here, though, is how do we do this? What's our strategy? Like, probably pretty much everybody here believes that psychedelic substances are valuable allies in our development as people. And one of the strategies that we have for that is the research within the medical structures that we have currently available to us. I like to imagine that as those structures themselves engage with psychedelics, my hope, and it is very much a hope, is that those structures themselves will be transformed in much the same way that a lot of the clinicians and researchers who I see engaged in this field who have taken these medicines have also themselves personally been transformed. I mean, if you have a model whereby your MDMA psychotherapy requires you to have two people sitting with you for that whole period, that's very different from a lot of the models of medicine that we currently have, where you come in, you have a 10-minute consultation, you're given a bunch of pills, good luck, see you later, 2 weeks' time. So there's also a kind of real politic here about, like, what do we do? What do we do? You know, we have this structure called the NHS. It's like a behemoth trying to turn, any kind of direction in it takes time and takes people like David and the team there. However imperfectly we might imagine this from our various perspectives, but that's the territory that we have to work with. And I wonder also, from the perspective of those traditional practitioners and those other individuals who have a lineage with the medicine, what they might benefit from the research that's been done. Certainly I know that from my own experience, I have the opportunity to show, as I mentioned earlier, those two great pieces of stylized brain imagery. This is your brain on placebo, this is your brain on psilocybin. That's a really helpful explanatory tool for me in this culture, in this space, to talk to people about how these things are unfolding. And it may be more problematic to talk about spirits. It may be more problematic to talk about some of the language that we find in those entheogenic lineage spaces. I don't know if anyone wants to come back and talk about that a little bit.
I think it's most interesting to hear what you guys think could potentially be a silver lining, if there is any, about any westernized approach with the science and so on, because obviously me coming from the science, I think it might be more interesting to hear you guys what you think about whether there's anything positive coming from that in the other direction. Because obviously there's a lot of amazingly important, a lot of wisdom that comes from traditions in other cultures that, I mean, anybody in the West, I mean, at least I would assume most are leaning towards and trying to understand and trying in some degree implement wisdom from into these sort of a more sort of westernized medicinal model. But what might be positive in the other direction?
Thank you for that question and making a bridge, because that's important and why we're here. One of the things I personally learned is actually the whole screening process. And another thing that I learned from a peer who's a psychologist said to me once, Natasja, get the therapy out of ceremony and use that for preparation and integration work. Which I thought, oh, interesting point of view coming from him. So I believe there is a lot that we can learn, and especially what Julian said about education and giving a framework. Personally, when I work with people, and especially it's people like us here, we need a different kind of approach, which is, again, when I started in the beginning, we are wired in a yang, which is we need to understand cognitively first, before we trust someone or something to go deeper into ourselves. That trust is created through understanding. That trust is then created through our nervous system. Right? So step number one in any process, and this is why I love being also on the other side, is what I've seen in the traditional aspect, and a lot of my peers in the traditional aspect, is there is a lack of understanding. Which when you come from a certain framework and you're wired in intuitively, you're wired in community, then that language makes sense. But then there are a lot of people that get lost in translation and meaning making. So certain frameworks are needed to understand. And then there is a difference, of course, by me saying, well, that was your spirit guide who was saying this and that. I don't think we should go into that reaction, but we do have to understand those parts, and especially when we work intergenerationally, because in the end, any understanding I have is intergenerational work. It's intergenerational healing that we are needed to do. And when we come into the healing realm and we understand both aspects, especially when you are more traditionally taught, you are able to maybe translate it with the language of clinical research or what framework you want to use in helping the other make meaning, the client or the participant make meaning out of their experience. So I believe what we're actually needing to do is understand both and be a lot more inclusive with each other in the frameworks. And then, we all have preferences and we all have identification with those preferences. And that's okay too. Right? We have that color palette, and people will be attracted to a specific color palette in that realm. So when someone is very more coming in from a clinical aspect or research aspect and coming into service with myself, I do always invite in, I do hold the space quite traditionally. I do share more spiritual aspects of the work. And I just inform, and then it's always about the other person understanding. The great thing is, it doesn't matter. People will resonate with the individual in a way, especially in service. So people will understand that when the trust is created, that resonance is in place. And that will allow someone to go deeper into their experience. So there is a beautiful paradox at play because I'm contradicting myself. And this is the work.
I think it does matter, actually.
Right.
So from a traditional perspective, the power is not so much in the plants. It might be in the plants. So let's talk about ayahuasca, for example. If you don't have icaros from a traditional perspective, it's because you haven't mastered the plant. And therefore, your work won't have any impact. Right, so the idea of saying, apologies in advance for this, but it doesn't matter if you come from a clinical perspective or from a traditional perspective or from a spiritual perspective. Well, let's see how that comes out in the wash. Once we know that mystical experience is associated.
I meant the client comes from that perspective.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what can we offer the client then? Like, I guess that's the question. We can offer them. Yeah, I mean, there are traditions which go a long way back, and they have magical words, and they have magical names, and they have Icaros, and they have things which contain power. I want to answer something that David said. What can we recommend from... Well, actually, I want to say two things. Firstly, it is my hope as well that the clinics can be influenced by the traditions, but I'm not seeing that at all. I've heard now that there's some research looking at sexual dieta. I know that Simon Ruffles' work, he's actually got some indigenous people to advise on the experiments, which is amazing. Good idea, get indigenous people to talk. But I wanted to respond to something else. What was I going to say?
I don't know, that's why we're separate people. I don't know.
Okay. It was something unpleasant and reactionary.
Please.
Oh yeah, I remember. So I don't know if this is so much the clinics, but I believe in the kind of neo-Afskero scene, when you go to a session, you approach with an intention, yeah? And I understand that an intention generally begins with I. In my lineage, you begin your session with a prayer to the male and female deities of the universe, and that's how you set your context, right? You don't go along because you want to be healed. You go along because it's the day of the Virgin Mary, or it's a certain thing in the traditional calendar, right? You're not going there for healing. You may end up with healing, but you're not really going there for healing. You're going there for worship and let's say knowledge and conversation. The mystical experience, as defined by William James, has four elements in it, but one of them is overwhelming newness, yeah, and a sense of revelation. That's two of the aspects, right? If you're approaching the unknown by setting yourself in a context of, as I say, the male and female deities of the universe, or the spirits of the forest. In one of our sessions, you'll sing 132 songs. Quite a lot of them are praying or in worship of the forest and its entities and its nature. You're not starting from I, as in I want to fix this thing with my knee, or I want to fix this relationship with my mum. And then when you get to the end of it, you're not sharing it in a sharing circle either. In fact, that's completely opposite what they say in the Amazon. They say if you share your visions, you'll lose your visions. Once you translate these incredible things into words, you're necessarily limiting them. And I've got a good example of this, actually. One of the guys who used to come along to my group, I told him not to write stuff down, not to discuss things out of session, and he went and he wrote it. He put it into a computer file. He was writing down all this stuff, and that file got corrupted. It was the first file he'd ever had corrupted on his computer. I thought that was rather good. So I said, don't do that. And maybe the spirits were listening, but he wasn't. So I guess that's what I want to say. The primacy of the self, which is kind of the downfall of humanism, I think. The fact that we are at the centre and everything else goes around us. I mean, even Galileo got away from that kind of thing. So that's what I would say to take to the clinic. If there's a way of introducing indigenous knowledge, and that doesn't mean by doing something you think might look a bit like the jungle. That means asking them what kind of stuff they would like to be brought in to the session, before the session, what kind of intentions you hold in your head while you're doing it, what kind of magic words you use, and also removing the I from the centre, because newness is very difficult to... If you're approaching as the most important person in the room, then you're missing out the invisible people in the room, and these are the guys who can really show you stuff, As Einstein once said, or might be apocryphal, you don't solve a problem from the same level as you ask the question. And I think that's the same with recovery, discovery and recovery. Related.
So I wonder whether or not, should we ask for some questions from the audience? And I'm particularly interested in hearing from perhaps other clinicians in the audience in terms of their thoughts about this? I don't know. We've got somebody over here. Can we get one of the? Thank you, Sarah.
Should I say something in the meantime?
Yes.
Yeah, actually, I do not at all disagree with what you're saying about obviously really bringing in the wisdom in a more direct and more involved way. I think it's absolutely meaningful. However, I also would point to the importance of at least acknowledge and consider that the context is different for people growing up, having their own heritage in a different kind of culture, in a different part of the world, where the religious directions are different, the cultural luggage, the way that we live in, and of course there's a lot of learning from different cultures. A good example is Buddhistic thinking and tradition entering in a different form into to the Western world. Is that good? Is it bad? Is it appropriation? What is it? But nevertheless, this is to some degree, in one form or the other, a bit the same that is happening, and I just think that you can you could potentially also overdo that in a way where it's simply just not going to resonate with the people who might be benefiting, interested in exploring these experiences with these drugs. And I don't think there's anything particularly wrong in that the context and the way that these are used might not be exactly the same as what you want it to be. I don't find that even very controversial to say. That doesn't mean that the learning and the wisdom and the input and the conversation is not important, but I just don't particularly see it as one or the other, and that you have to do it in a specific way everywhere. There's a lot to learn, and I agree on that, but the context is different.
I would love to just share an anecdote very quickly, and I would love to hear you. A quick anecdote. One time I was sitting with this question, so I asked the medicine. And the medicine is psilocybin. And it literally said, "I don't give a F," which I find very funny. So do with that whatever you want. Maybe it's us humans making a lot of, but I also have preference, So yes.
Yeah, thank you, John Anderson. So what I'm feeling initially is, I'm thinking of the worlds collide. What I'm actually feeling is worlds collaborate. And I think a useful place to start would be for, on the clinical side, those people running clinical trials to work more collaboratively with people who come from the more spiritual side of things, and actually have them come in and help inform, set up study protocol and things like that. Because my overarching concern at the moment is that with it, at least in the UK and also in the US, also the consideration, being very clinically driven, is that basically most therapy on the NHS is CBT, right? And CBT is not a sufficient base in and of itself to hold these sorts of experiences. So any kind of rollout of this within the NHS is problematic for multiple reasons, which is why you need the collaboration. Because if it just relies on the clinic, what will surely happen is that any rescheduling in the UK of psilocybin will likely be coming with a lot of restrictions attached to it, in terms of the people who can prescribe it and the people who can work with it. And the precedent for that is what's already happening in the cannabis domain, right? So if you've already set it up so that you have more collaboration, that kind of starts to open minds to think, well, okay, there is this other dimension to it, and then we can start with useful conversation of what aspects can work together. Where do they agree on? Where do they disagree? How do they work out those differences? So there's that. And then there's the other issue, which is when it comes to ethics, which I know we'll come on to later. If you're then thinking about collaboration and people,
we don't have very long, John, so maybe if David's able to respond to that, about how do we invite those other conversations in, or those other practitioners into the space. Can you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's one hope that I think I also share with others, that this main model of how mental health, but for that matter also physical health in our part of the world typically works, that it's about, and that's because of the treatment solutions that are offered and are that are there and that people are pointed towards. They are fixing a specific problem. So it might be that the intention is biopsychosocial, and you might have that conversation in mental health, which I think all colleagues and people work in that space do, but it's still pointing towards a decision about a specific treatment that either is an SSRI that is going to elevate your serotonin and the synapse a bit, or a super tight little short program that is very orchestrated of CBT. And that means it's very going for something super specific, and the holistic, any spirituality, anything related to too much trauma is kind of lost in that. It can't be contained in that model. And I hope really that if nothing else, then the introduction of this treatment model that is broader, deeper, profoundly more interesting, also for people to go through together with therapists or in other places as shamans, is hopefully opening up to allow that to be broadened out. And I agree, it doesn't fit well into a lot of the current structures, and therefore they need to be shaken and rethought. That I think actually is mainly the main beauty of implementing these in this part of the world. And then there will be all these challenges. We can hear that there's a lot of things to think about, and I don't disagree with any of what you guys are saying. I can also just see it from speaking to the NHS trying to set up this clinic, that obviously there's resistance, there's confusion, there's what is this and what are you, So I think it's going to take a generation to have this implemented. This is not, in 3 years. Yeah, it might be licensed in 3 years, but to actually make it work and to have the structure, to have the training of what's needed, it's going to take a long time.
Ooh, I don't know. Danny, do you want to respond?
Just give me 1 minute, yeah.
1 minute?
So that question is how do we resolve the differences that was brought up? Historically, how have we resolved differences between our epistemology and indigenous epistemology? We've ignored the indigenous people. Very simple. And this is what I was getting at about the clinical research as well. Are we taking, I keep on hearing about these hopes, we could do this. It sort of sounds almost religious. It seems like people waiting for the second coming. I understand that science is about analysing the data, and if we analyse the data, that indigenous wisdom has not been brought in 20, 25 years of research, as far as I'm aware. So, we need a radical shift, and I think what's actually happening is it's just more of the same. To be honest, we talk about, we've got to understand this culture and incorporate aspects of this culture. As Terence McKenna said, culture is not your friend, right? We've currently got, Mind Bloom are offering 6 ketamine tablets in a Zoom call for just over £1,000. That's our culture leaking into what was my culture, as in, psychedelic culture is worlds colliding, worlds interpenetrating. There's got to be some kind of a doorkeeper on what aspects of this culture. I've rejected this culture for a very good reason, right? I don't want people fiddling with their phones whilst they're at a session, because everyone fiddles on their phones. We're going to incorporate that. No?
Sorry, I was busy fiddling on my phone at that point. Could we perhaps take another question? I think there's several hands up.
Should I ask already?
Someone over here, I think, this side.
No, I feel bad.
Don't feel bad.
David, nice to meet you guys. Thank you for the beautiful discussion. That's a weird effect on my voice, but I live in Peru, and I went there to get to know these traditions and work with them and try to bridge these sides as well. And what I realized living in the spiritual communities and working with plants from different aspects is that there are so many different traditions that approach these plants and have their own ways of approaching them. Is it Santo Daime? Is it UDT? Is it Shipibo? Is it the Brazilian tribes? They all have different traditions, different approach. The Shipibo will say plants are jealous and you shouldn't mix the plants together, and the Brazilian tribes will smoke weed during ceremonies and so on. I mean, each shaman, each curandero has their own tradition and also their belief systems. And I believe they're all valid because they believe in them. So whatever they believe in kind of works. So I also see facilitators working, facilitators working with singing bowls, mantras, and so on, art. So I would want to ask, isn't it just about allowing people to resonate with what they feel will help them in a way that will help them and offering them different options, as many options that resonate with them? That's my question. Honoring all of them.
Thank you for bringing your wisdom and this question. Again, the beautiful paradox of this work, because there is absolutely a yes. You know, you have your discernment and you have your sovereign free will to decide where you want to lean into. And then you have a part of the lack of education and understanding, right? Just because my 3-year-old wants to ride a Ferrari doesn't mean I'm going to give it the keys. So that is also a difference. So the invitation would actually be to bring more of this education and to maybe bring more education around spirituality as a whole. What does that mean? And then maybe invite us to think about, so if we are all the elders right now of this generation, for the generations to come, right? That's a big responsibility, isn't it? So what are we creating for this soil right here that we will educate in our practices? And we do come from both lineages. We do have, you know, signs and clinics here right now. So that is going to be part of our elders and our teachers. So the invitation would actually be go a little bit beyond of how can we start education, how can we start bridging, because that will inform an individual of understanding the depth and what they might actually really need. Because, like what was said about the Icaros and about specific diets, you know, we work a lot with specialized people in this realm, in the retreats, where we invite them in. But what we do is in a full preparation journey, we educate people on why. Why is it important? And how we're going to do it. Because if you don't do it, there's no permission. It will be some abracadabra thing, and it will be really vague, and people don't understand. So we have to meet each other where we are. So thank you for that question, but I think it's a deeper invitation to build more bridges, actually. Thank you.
I often wonder about if it's true, as I understand it, that the mystical experience is closely correlated with these healings, these transformations. If the mystical experience is coming back into medicine through the work of Imperial and those other groups, the mystical experience, as you say, is this powerful thing. I like to think, I hope, I pray that that mystical experience brought back into that setting might really change many, many things in that setting. You know, might really change many things in that setting. I wonder if we've got about another 15 minutes or thereabouts. Should we? What?
There's a young lady there trying to, yeah.
I think so I'm a clinician by background. I think one of the big challenges is that in the West, you know, when you're trained, you always separate the mind from the body, from the spirit, you know, and so it's almost like the issue comes from the start. And I really feel for my colleagues in NHS, because you try to support so many people in a broken system. And how can you be really helping when you have so many hoops to jump over and so many trials to pass just to be allowed to do something? But I do think in here, it's almost, there's a split between understanding life through the mind versus the heart as such. And you know, if you really go and appreciate and respect the traditions of the Amazon and work together with plant medicines in the way that they should be worked with, it's almost like coming back to this realm. You struggle to find the language to really communicate what exactly happened, and I think that this is where the challenge is. And so I guess my question is, do you think that, is it realistically in this lifetime to legally even be allowed to practice or work with the plant medicines by the NHS or, you know, in this country overall? Or should we really be prepared to almost put in the discharge letters, you know, we recommend a trip to the Amazon, go to Peru, and almost create therapeutic retreats and allow for people to be able to travel and work in places that are legally, you know, would legally help you work in a proper way as such.
Yeah, really, really good question.
Thank you.
So, David, would you like to?
Yeah, I think it is a good question. Obviously, the development that comes from the sort of, you know, hardcore pharma development, these companies who are running the trials, which is, by the way, not really what we are doing. And I just actually also want to emphasize, we come from pretty geeky neuroscience. That's our starting point, is to try and better understand the brain. That's what we are trained in, and these tools are valuable and interesting. And obviously, we are part of the, you know, testing of them and so on, but in a way we come from neuroscience. But the companies who are developing them, they come from, you know, developing a product that hopefully will help people, and therefore it's a, you know, a business model for them. And for that to be to happen, they need to go through all these trials. They need to be then licensed. Whether NHS will then catch them and implement them, and what is going to be lost along in that process. With all these nice intentions, as you were saying, and a bit sort of cynically saying that, you know, is that going to work? Maybe we are too optimistic. Maybe it's actually difficult, because when you scale it, when you calculate, when nice guidelines are evaluating thumbs up, thumbs down, there's tons of elements that go into it, and it's out of everybody's hands. It has to fit into that system and that model. Is that going to work? Will it be such a trimmed down, unappealing, maybe not really super helpful version? That could be a fear. And then, yes, then I would say then it's probably better for people to seek it where it has always been, to be completely honest. However, the hope is, and I think we need to be optimistic, and also need to, I mean, at least I want to be happy about that. You know, I think it's better that we have a clinic now within the NHS trying to do this. Yes, maybe it's not the model that everybody would prefer, but it's a model that maybe sits somewhere in the middle. But it's a first step, and I think that's important. And we do try to protect the different aspects that are soft and important for these drugs to be safely used in our eyes, and also leaning towards wisdom from shamanistic culture and so on. Whereas in the large scale, you know, coming out with it, how will that work, and what will be trimmed down in a way? So the time will show what will end up being the final model for those clinics. It could be that short experiences with, you know, DMT and so on, group therapy, community peer support models that are made for psychedelics, maybe inspired by what happens in addiction services, but done differently for psychedelics. That might help and save it a little bit, because that might make it, you know, cheap enough to be integrated in a safe and, you know, meaningful and helpful way. But yeah, it's a good question. I mean, both will happen, I think.
I'll be really quick.
Really quick.
Just briefly, I think the ritualists will be hanging on to their rituals for quite a while yet, so we'll still be around. About who makes decisions on what happens in clinical practice. I mean, look at the world, Pfizer.
Another question, perhaps.
Hi everyone, can you hear me okay? Good. So my question perhaps is a little bit more specific, but I think it's good to be specific sometimes. And I think, Danny, you mentioned something at the very beginning. You said, yeah, okay. You mentioned that it's not advisable, so you mentioned that people say that it's not advisable to take ayahuasca together with SSRIs, while you think that no clinical studies have shown that it's dangerous, so we shouldn't stop people from doing that. So I think that given that there is a strong possibility of an underlying pharmacological mechanism behind the dangerous interaction, and there are some case study reports there are not clinical trials that have been done to test this, but I don't think that just listing all of the things that we're doing wrong in the West and like putting this as one of them is a very responsible thing to say. And I don't know, would you like to share some more thoughts about that?
Yes, thank you. It's a question of epistemology, you know, how do we know where knowledge comes from? How do we decide what is true and what is not, right? So in the scientific community, which I believe the clinics are representing, what you do is you collect data and then you tabulate that data and then you make a rule out of that data, right? That's what Newton said, for example. He said, your theories have nothing to do with experimental philosophy. So the theory, just to repeat, because I don't know if I made myself clear, the theory is that there's a contraindication, that if you have SSRIs and then you take ayahuasca on top of it, it might kill you, basically, right? So there are a number of things that are wrong with this theory. Firstly, this wasn't known at the time, but there are two ways that SSRI works. You've got long-acting and short-acting. I imagine the people over there can explain this better. But as I understand it, the reason that no one has died, I mean, no one has died after God knows how many thousands or tens of thousands of doses have been administered. This is what I mean with the UDV. They continued to give ayahuasca to people who were on SSRIs. I mean, I used to know a psychiatrist who was an UDV member, and he literally sent people. Oh, the União de Vegetal. União de Vegetal. It's a Brazilian ayahuasca religion. So they continue to do this, right? So what is our epistemology? Are we going to say the spirits told me and then I did it, or are we going to say we collected data and this is how we did it? At the moment, what we have is the only taboo, and I mentioned this as one thing because I was using it as an example of how misguided, let's say, the scientific perspective on psychedelics has been for about 20 years now. The only example we have of a taboo, i.e. a thing you shouldn't do before you drink ayahuasca, is SSRIs. Yeah? You probably shouldn't get shit-faced the night before, but we can just take that as a given. So would I like to say more about it? I mean, I'm horrified. I'm absolutely horrified. What is the impact of that? The impact of it is people who are on SSRIs, i.e. the clinically depressed, the ones who are at most risk for committing suicide, are denied access to ayahuasca because Callaway and Grob published something in like 20 years ago which hasn't been corroborated by anybody. No disrespect to those researchers. They made a good point. There was a potential reaction between these two things. But A, the science has moved on and we've hung on to the taboo, and B, it has never happened. Does that answer the question about me saying more? I think the epistemology is wrong. I think the epistemology is fundamentally wrong, right? And I think it is across the board with this kind of thing, you know. If I think about my cure, I got bitten by a sandfly, I got leishmaniasis. Everyone told me I was crazy to want to treat it with ayahuasca. I listened to my spirits and I did what they told me. And I learned a whole load of things over that 5 months. I was drinking ayahuasca every day But the kind of cure that I did, which involved prayer, which involved 400-year-old slaves incorporated into the body of a medium, which involved 6 or 7 different barks of 6 or 7 different trees, you can't reproduce that in the clinic. It simply cannot be studied, right? What does that mean? Does that mean it means there's something wrong? It means that your epistemology is limited. Your way of generating knowledge is limited. If you're saying, well, we can't study this, we can't say it cures cancer, we can't say it cures leishmaniasis because this guy, he went to the jungle and he had his leishmaniasis cured, but we can't do like a double-blind study on it because what you're going to do, make me drink something that tastes like ayahuasca over 6 months. It's completely inappropriate to the task at hand. That's what I'm saying. It's appropriate to some other tasks, right? So great, let's dialogue. I'm very happy that we dialogue, but I don't see the scientific community listening. That's what I'm saying.
But do you even think that there's scientific value in testing anything scientifically? It sounds, I mean, you put it a bit extreme. That's also good for the debate and conversation. But it makes me, when I listen to you here, I'm like, is there any value in doing any double-blind randomized control or anything? And why would there be when you say it's more important what the what the spirit told you to do with the sandfly. Well, I mean, is it then the evidence produced from science, from these trials, not necessarily in psychedelics, but more broadly now, if what the spirits are told, I would say, I would hope those spirits have been on some courses since the 80s when the SSRIs came, because that old wisdom is not that, I mean, they are new drugs from the 80s. Anyway, I'm just saying, do you then make sort of outrule the importance of testing things in a scientific matter? Yeah.
I would love to just contribute. Thank you for that question. So when I circle back to, I think I said it earlier about the facilitation and the difference between being a surgeon with this work, right? Like the one hand, and the other hand of being now like nice little buns of trip sitters that are being pushed out into the world to do this work. I believe that if we don't have some form of framework where people are actually a little bit protected in facilitation, which would be then to say no on SSRIs or no on certain other diagnoses, is because these trip sitters don't have the education and the training, right? So I'm just also bringing in just slightly different perspective on if anybody can just work in this realm and you're maybe not somatically informed, not trauma informed, not informed with a specific screening, and not informed fully in the understanding of the energetics in this work, the ecstatic state in this work, then you have to create a field of protection, of understanding where not to go. So this, I would say, would be a benefit of having that framework, especially for all the trip sitters, right? So I'm just bringing something else to the mix.
Time has caught us up, beautiful people. I think that we've got a really interesting beginning here of looking at these different aspects of a community that we are all creating, whether we are clinicians, whether we are ayahuasqueros, whether we are people who've spent time in Brazil, whether we are people who spent most of their lives in the West Country. But we're finding different ways of doing this, and this is a difficult and charged conversation, but it's important. It's important. If we believe these medicines and we believe these experiences are valuable and can help us humans unfold to our maximum and glorious potential, and maybe we need to use all of the tools that we have available, and we need to be critical of those things, and we need to be informed of those things, because this is the work that we have, all of us as a community, right here, right now. I want to thank you very, very much, Danny Nemu. I want to thank Natasja Pelgrom. I want to thank David Erritzøe. We're going to have a break now. We've got stalls out here. We will be reconvening at 12 noon for the next panel. Thank you very, very much for being here at Random Convention Worlds Collide.